Once a young boy brought home to his mother a note from his teacher at school, and the note said, "Ma'am, your son Tom is too dull to learn. I'd ask you to keep him at home and teach him at home because he's drawing back the whole class." Well, that letter really perturbed the mother, and she thought to herself, "I'm going to teach my boy all that I know, all that I've learned, and he'll grow up to be someone." Well, a number of decades later, when Tom died, on the day of his funeral, people throughout America had put out and dimmed their lights in their home because of this man, Thomas Edison, who had invented the light bulb and 150 other patents as well. It seemed as though this boy who was told he was too dull to learn became the inventor of the great invention that kept all of America burning brightly even until today. When our gospel reading, Jesus is rejected by his own people. They knew him, they watched him growing up. How could he possibly be the Messiah? How could he possibly be the one to bring the message of God to God's people? Like Thomas Edison, who was told he was too dull to learn, Jesus was considered too ordinary to be a vehicle for God's salvation. The great test of our faith is to be able to see God in the ordinary of our days and to recognize with wonder and awe the ways that God reveals himself in the ordinary places, the ordinary events of our daily lives. Jesus was fully human like you and I are. He looked like us, and anybody who would look upon Jesus would see a human being, nothing special to draw their eye to him, nothing extraordinary just by looking at him. But later on in his life, when some of the events that took place in his life, like the transfiguration, the resurrection, the ascension of Jesus, people were able to see the wonder, the grace of God shining through him. God asks us during our ordinary time that we're in, where do we see the grace of God beyond the extraordinary, in the ordinary events of our daily lives? We are to consider little children, how they see with eyes of wonder and awe, just ordinary things that maybe they haven't seen before. They're able to be excited and wowed by these little things that they see every day. How are we to recapture that sense of being like little children before all of God's events before us? Have we lost that sense of wonder and awe at the little things that happen in our lives? Well, let's look at some of the examples of where we can miss the glory of God in the simple and ordinary things of life. First of all, we can look at marriage and see how we are really seeing God in the ordinariness of life. One of the difficulties for newly married couples is that they set their expectations very high, and they think that their time of dating, their time of being engaged is going to set the stage for the rest of their married life. That they'll have the same feelings of high and exhilaration of being with each other and still doing all the great same events that they had done in the past. But in reality, each other change because of growing age, become a little bit sort of punchy with the age going upon them, and lose the energy that they had in the past. And how do married couples see the presence of God as their couple becomes more ordinary to them in the day in, day out struggles of daily life? It's a real challenge to married couples to be able to recognize the grace that is in the very ordinary, the ordinary spouse, the very ordinary marriage, as they may look at others and see that others seem to have a more extraordinary marriage than myself. Secondly, the same challenge may be in the case of priests as well. They're prepared in the seminary to go out to the ends of the earth, so to speak, to bring the message of God, the good news of Jesus, to the world. But yet they get caught up in the ordinariness of everyday parish life, of fixing broken furnaces, of dealing with squabbles in parish staffs, and looking for new volunteers again and again for various ministries and parish groups. And sometimes priests can get discouraged, not seeing the extraordinary that they're hoping for as they're preparing for priesthood in the seminary. So we're called to pray for priests that they will see the presence of God in the ordinariness of their life in parish ministry. Third, we can ask ourselves, Lord, how do we recognize and accept the presence of God in the ordinariness of our work? We are called to look back on our earlier days when we first started our career or our profession and think about the joy that we had of getting out of bed in the morning, going to work and being able to serve and help people. Have we lost some of that sense of joy, that sense of exuberance to really serve and use our gifts and use our learning for the betterment of humanity around us? Or rather, do we see work as kind of a drudgery of simply putting the pieces in the everyday life just to get the paycheck, and then we live for the weekend, so to speak, because we see the extraordinary happening there in the weekends? St. Paul calls us, whatever you do it for the Lord. And so in our workplace every day, we're to do the ordinary simple things, the everyday mundane tasks of our work. Do it for the Lord, and not just for the sake of getting a paycheck to bring home. And also we are called to be a living example of Christ in our workplace. How can I truly be a person who helps others, who cares for others, who is that living sign of love that the Lord has given to us by his own presence in our world, our very ordinary world? Another place where we can often miss the grace of God in the ordinary is when we look at the poor, the homeless, the sick. And we can sometimes just see the poor, the homeless, by the outside shell, the roughness, their dirtiness, the smell that they may have. We may see people on the street corners begging for food, begging for some change to help them to buy what they need to sustain themselves for the day. We might even change lanes to get away from them, that they will not bother us. But Pope Francis says that we're to see Christ in the poor, and Jesus is very much present to us, and very visible in the ordinary people, the poor, the homeless in our midst. So how can we see with greater joy that presence of Christ in those who are poor, those who are weak? And then finally, how do we really recognize with true appreciation the ordinariness of God who comes to us in sacramental forms? The ordinary form of bread and wine, the ordinary form of the holding of the hands and saying the prayer of absolution, the ordinary form of the oil that is anointed on us at our confirmation, etc. How do we really recognize and really appreciate that God is here in what he chooses as ordinary signs of this world, ordinary elements, to be those vessels through which he brings salvation to our modern world and our everyday lives? How do we really recognize and open ourselves to see the grandeur of God in the very ordinary things that God sends our way in the sacraments? So this is a test of our faith, to see the grace in the ordinary events, the ordinary people, the ordinary things of our daily lives. And especially during this time of pandemic that we've experienced in these past couple of years, that for many of us, that we've worked and taught and ate and recreated all in the same place in our home, and we think that's just one day after another. It's even hard to remember what day it is because everything seems so the same, everything seems so ordinary. How can you recognize that God is there in the midst of the ordinariness of day-to-day life? Well, each of us are called by the Lord to be witnesses of our faith, to share what relationship with God has truly meant to us and has given us a sense of hope, a sense of meaning in the ordinariness of life. We may think to ourselves, I'm too ordinary to be able to share the faith of Jesus with others. How can the Lord possibly be calling me? But the bottom line is that God calls each and every one of us, all of us have accepted to be baptized, to be ministers and witnesses of our faith to others in our daily workplace, in our neighborhoods, in our families. And how do we do that? How do we share that message of what the Lord means to us with others? Well, St. Paul says, we hold a treasure within, not made of gold, in earthen vessels. If God's Spirit dwells in us, we are to allow that Spirit of God to move from us to speak to the hearts of others that we meet every day, to share with them this wonderful treasure that we have within, and the majestic message of eternal life with our God. St. Paul also points in the second reading to the way in which we can be messengers of evangelization of others. He says, love is patient, love is kind, love is never boastful or conceited. Persons who genuinely love others are like magnets that draw others to them. By truly loving, being cared for, concerned about the needs of others, we draw others to them, and by them coming to us, we can then share with them this wonderful majesty that we have within, of that eternal life that God gives us, that no moth can destroy, no worm can eat, no robber can take away, but that will last forever.